I want to start somewhere you might not expect. A few weeks ago, I was at revival and the preacher was talking on manna. Now, if you didn't grow up in the church, here is just a short version. A group of people were moving through the wilderness with no food and no way to grow any. And every morning, something they had never seen before showed up on the ground. Enough to eat, enough for that day. Now, there were two rules: gather what you need for today and do not store it up. And some of them stored it up anyway. I mean, of course they did. And by morning, what they had saved had gone bad. And I sat there in that service and something in me went completely still because I've spent over 20 years in continuity and resilience, and I build capacity models for a living. And I was listening to a 3,000-year-old story describing the exact thing I had been doing for myself. Not scarcity, surplus. Welcome to the Leadership Story, where we talk about real women, real leadership, real resilience. I'm Lisa Jones. Today, we are talking about burnout and the moment I understood what it was really doing to me. And a quick note before we dig in: if by the end of this you're thinking, I need help with this, I have something new. One-on-one coaching built around exactly what we're about to get into. I'll tell you about it at the end. Stay with me. I'm going to name the source once right here, and then we're going to talk about it in the language I actually work in, because what I heard that night is the capacity principle, and it explains something about burnout that most of the conversation gets wrong. Now, let me back it up a little bit because I think this will put it in perspective. So earlier this year, I was on a walk, 3 miles, my usual route, headphones in, and I decided to listen to Mel Robbins' episode about capacity. Now, normally on my walks, I try to either listen to music or a podcast, something that's going to clear my mind or catch me up on some current trends, whatever that may be. But this day, I was listening to Mel Robbins, and she was talking about capacity. And somewhere in that first half mile, I started crying. Not just a little tear, crying on the sidewalk in public for most of the 3 miles. And here's what was strange about it. I wasn't sad. I was relieved because for the first time in a long time, I had been carrying something that actually had a name. I have a professional vocabulary for exactly this: capacity, load, single points of failure. I walk teams through assessments to document it. You know, I also get paid to find it in other people's organizations. And I've been carrying something for months that I could not identify. So I did what most of us do. I called it stress. I assumed I was tired or sensitive or slipping. Let me tell you what the months were before that walk looked like, because the word burnout does not give you the picture. Now, the organization I was with was going through a reorg, and a couple of my colleagues left the organization. My team didn't have a leader. And in the middle of all of that, I had stepped up as interim manager. So I was doing a job in a structure that was actively coming apart at the seams with no clarity about where any of it was going to land. That was not the burnout. That was stress, and that was legitimate. The uncertainty was real. The extra weight was real. Anyone could have felt it. And stress has a cause you can point to. I could point to mine. It was a name and a timeline and an end date somewhere out ahead of me, even if I couldn't see it yet. Now, burnout, now that's something different. The burnout was what I was doing on top of all of that, carrying more than the moment required. I was proving I could hold the interim role and my role and leaving nothing for anyone to question in a season where everything was already uncertain. The reorg was happening to me, the over gathering I was doing to myself. And that is the distinction I could not see from the inside. I kept thinking, of course I'm exhausted. Look at everything going on. And the everything going on, that was real because it was not the whole bill. I was not tired. I was past capacity. Those are not the same thing. This is what I want to say if you don't take anything else away from this episode. When you're past capacity long enough, you stop diagnosing your circumstances and you start diagnosing yourself. Now, let me say that one again. When you're past capacity for long enough, you stop diagnosing your circumstances and you start diagnosing yourself. And I cried for 3 miles because naming it meant I could finally stop. Now, if you read my newsletter called Strategy Unscripted on Substack about scaling on empty, you've heard the story of this gutter cry that I had. But I'm telling it again because it's the front door of everything else. Now, let me preface, I'm not a psychologist, although I did take an intro to psych in college. And actually, I got a B, so maybe I missed my calling. Yet, I want to draw a line because there are two words that get used interchangeably, and it costs us. And like most people, I thought they were one and the same. Stress is a load, and burnout is load beyond capacity. Stress is heavy and it's real, and in response, we do the things we are told to do about it. Get more sleep, movement, like that walk I was trying to do, a deadline that finally passes. Stress, it has a shape and it goes up and it comes down. You can be under enormous stress and still be fundamentally fine because the system is holding, strained, but holding. Now, burnout, now that's a whole other animal. And I say other. Burnout is what happens after the system stops holding. It's not stress turned up louder. It's a different state. And that is why the weekend does not touch it. You cannot rest off a capacity problem because rest was never the missing input. Having room for more was the problem. Here is how to tell them apart in real life. So let's think about this. Stress says, this week was a lot. But burnout says, I don't remember the last week that wasn't. Stress makes you want to get through it, and burnout makes you stop caring whether you do. Stress is loud, and burnout is just flat. That flatness is what most of us miss because we're expecting exhaustion to look dramatic. It usually does not. It looks like a competent woman doing her job with the lights off inside. Now, this is where the newsletter stopped at naming it. In the newsletter, I told you the assignment was to name what it was costing you. And that was honest because if you did that, you may be standing there now with the same name for it and no clear next step. So let me give you the next move. When we talk about burnout, we talk about it as a shortage, not enough time, not enough support, not enough hours. And sometimes that's true. But go back to the sidewalk with me. I was not short on anything. I was handling it. Interim role, reorg, all of it. Handling it. And that was a problem. Now, let me give you another example. Now, I know I'm dating myself, but remember the I Love Lucy episode where she's working in a candy factory and she starts out great packaging chocolates? Now, first of all, those chocolates are very good, but I digress. Well, the conveyor belt, it starts to speed up and she gets to a point where it's too fast and she's stuffing chocolates everywhere. That was my problem. I was not depleted because I didn't have enough. I was depleted because I was gathering more than the day required. For me, it was taking on more because people trusted my judgment and I didn't want to say no. Someone needed a read on something, a decision sanity check, a hard conversation handled. And I was good at that. So they came to me and I took it every time. I did not protect my calendar because I didn't notice how it was affecting my capacity. But it shows up differently for everyone. And if you lead, you probably done a version of it. The email you answered because you saw it first and could not leave it. The task you held on to because handing it off felt slower than just doing it yourself. Women, we especially know this one. We are the ones who make sure nothing falls, who catch things no one assigned to anyone else, who carry the parts other people forget were being carried. None of this is necessary. All of it was load. This is the part I keep coming back to because in my field, when one person is the only one holding a function up, we don't call that person dedicated. We call that a single point of failure. We write it up. We flag it as a risk for the business. You would put it on a client's assessment without even blinking. But in your own life, you can carry that risk for years and call it reliability. Let me say what overgathering actually is because I've been circling it. It's not ambition. It's not even perfectionism, though we tend to call it that. It's saying yes to everything you can without asking whether you actually have the room for it. And that's the whole engine. Not wanting more, not running out. And it works. I benefited from it. You become the one they come to. You become the person whose name goes on the hard thing. That question is real and you built it honestly. But I want to ask you something I didn't ask myself for a very long time. Where is it coming from? Not the effort, the room for the effort. Every hour you extend past what the day required came out of an hour that was already spoken for. So, what was in it? Now, I can tell you what was in mine. It was the walk I didn't take, the friend who text I kept meaning to return until enough time passed that returning it felt like an event. The Saturday thing I used to do for no reason except that it made me feel like myself. Now, for me, I'm just going to put it out there. It's walking every aisle of Wegmans. Now, if you know, you know. That is what funded every time. And none of it went out in a dramatic way. There was no comment where I decided to give those up. I just kept being the thing I would move because they were the only things on the list where no one was waiting on me. Nobody follows up on the thing that fills you. So it loses quietly every week to something with a deadline attached. The ironic thing was protecting other people's time was my job. When I was an administrative assistant, I sat on my boss's calendars and I guarded them. I blocked hours they needed to actually do their work, and I defended those blocks from people who wanted them. I was definitely good at that, but I don't always do it for myself. Not because I don't know how to, I know exactly how. Because when the moment came, I would look at that block of my calendar and see the only thing on the whole day that could move without anyone noticing. So I moved it every time. And I told myself I would get back to it later in the week. And there is no later in the week. There never is. That is what I want to name because I think we have turned protecting your time into a scheduling skill. And it definitely isn't. Anyone can put a block on their calendar. I did it professionally for my bosses. The hard part is holding it when the only thing on the list that no one is waiting on. Protecting time is easy. Protecting the thing that has no deadlines is the actual work. Now, I'm not telling you a sad story about a woman who stopped taking walks. That was where the capacity came from. That was the supply. So that means I was making a trade. And at the time, I didn't know I was trading at all. I thought I was giving up small things, a walk, a text, my Wegman stroll. They felt like the least important items on the list. So they were the obvious ones to spend. I had no idea what I was spending. Those were not the least important things. They were the supply. They were the source of the capacity I kept spending everywhere else. And I was drawing it down every week without ever once counting it. Nothing on the calendar tells you that. That is what most of us miss. Not that we're giving up too much. Now, we already know that part, and we can say that out loud. We just don't know what the small things are actually holding up. And that works. It works beautifully. Right up until the morning, it doesn't because there's a floor under it, and you can't see the floor until you hit it. Now, that is what spoils, just like the manna, not the extra effort. The extra effort was never the problem. It was everything I quietly stopped doing in order to afford it. Listen, reliability that costs you the thing that makes you reliable, it's not strength. It's a countdown. Now, I want to be careful because I'm not about to tell you that this was a personal discipline problem. It's not, and the research is not subtle about why. There's a body of work behind a book called The No Club by 4 economists who got tired of watching this happen to themselves. So they studied what they call non-promotable tasks, work that has to get done and that nobody gets promoted for. Things like taking the notes, onboarding the new person, planning the thing, sitting on the committee, smoothing the conflict. At one professional services firm they studied, women spent about 200 more hours a year on that work than men did. 200 hours. That is a month of full-time work every year on tasks that do not show up on a single performance review. And it's not because women volunteer out of the goodness of their hearts, though we do volunteer more. Their research found women were 48% more likely to raise a hand for work nobody wanted. But it also found something harder. Managers of both genders were 44% more likely to ask a woman. So, are you gathering more because you're being handed more and because saying no costs you something it doesn't cost him? Here's a number for everyone listening who runs a team. In a McKinsey study, nearly 90% of companies said the work employees do supporting each other are critical to the business. About a quarter said they formally recognize it. So let me get this straight. It's critical, it gets unrecognized. That gap is not an accident. That gap is a design choice. Now, here's the second thing. Eagle Hill Consulting ran a national survey of U.S. employees in March of 2025. 68% said much of their time goes to low value, inefficient work. Most of what you're gathering is not the work, it's the residue around the work. Now, I want to be careful how I frame this because this isn't something someone chose. There is no morning where you looked at your calendar, saw it was full, and constantly chose to add more anyway. It's just what is done, what was modeled for you, rewarded in you, expected of you long enough that it stopped registering as a behavior at all. Now, I said this on the show before that women learn it early and we learn it thoroughly. We put ourselves last, we push through, we get it done, we take care of parents, we do those other things, and then we do for ourselves. Nobody delivers this as an instruction. It arises a value, which is why you can't argue with it. You're not holding a position, you're holding something that feels like character. Is what makes it so hard. You're not attached to the extra. You've never examined it. It has been running underneath everything you do for so long that it does not present as a habit anymore. It presents as you. So when I say stop gathering past what the day requires, I know what I'm asking. Not to lower a standard, to interrupt something you've been doing since before you had language for it and find out what's there when it stops. So let me get practical because I don't want to hand you a philosophy. Start small, genuinely small. Some nights I'd stand in the kitchen at 6:30 running a full analysis. What is in the freezer? What needs to be used? What my husband will actually eat? Whether I have energy for the pan I will need to wash. And then I order food. Nothing bad happens. My husband never said, I noticed you didn't cook tonight, and I think less of you as a leader. That is the whole muscle. It costs nothing to practice there. Here's what it looked like for me. When I worked for a global organization, my lunch hour was not really a lunch hour. It was a window where my day overlapped with other time zones. Prime real estate. If a call had nowhere else to go, that is where it went. It was also when I worked out. That was when I had the most energy. And I knew if I did not go work out then, I wasn't going out. So that was the hour I blocked. 2 days a week, 2 hours a month. And it did not hold itself. That block came under attack constantly from people with real meetings who didn't see white space on my calendar. So I pushed back. Not always. Some things could not be moved. But most of the time, I said no to people I would normally never say no to. Anyone can block time. The hard part is deciding again every week against a real cost for one thing nobody but me was waiting on. And that was the point. It was never about the 2 hours. It was finding out that the thing I had been treating on the only movable item on my calendar was not actually the only movable item on my calendar. Just enough is not lowering your standards. It's not doing worse work. It's not becoming the worst person who coasts while everyone else carries it. So let me be precise. Sufficiency is not the absence of a standard. It is a standard, and it's a harder one because it requires you to actually know what the work needs instead of hiding behind doing it all. Doing everything is easy. It takes no judgment. You just do it, and no one else can ever say you fell short. Deciding what today actually requires means you have to be right. You have to know the difference between the part that matters and the part you have just always done. That is not less work. That is harder work. And this is the work you were actually promoted for. Just enough is not less standard. It's more judgment. If you lead people, if you sit in HR or talent, if you're the one who has to answer for why your best performers keep leaving or keep flattening out, you've probably run a wellness program. Most organizations have mental health days, meditation app, resilience training on a Thursday afternoon, and you've probably watched it not work and wonder whether people just did not engage with it. They engaged with it, but it was the wrong intervention. You cannot solve a capacity problem with a recovery program. If the load on a person exceeds what a person can hold, better recovery just reduces a well-rested person who is still going to break. Now, on a slightly longer timeline, and if we were being honest, that can become the actual purpose of these programs, helping people endure a broken system a little longer. Everyone can feel that. So here's a question I would ask instead, and it's the question I ask in every continuity assessment I have ever ran. If this person goes down, what happens next? Not just systems, your people. Pick your 3 strongest performers and answer it honestly. If the answer is that the function stops, you have an undocumented single point of failure that you've been rewarding for absorbing risk on your behalf. How much of what that person does every day actually requires them? Because if 200 hours a year of a high performer's time is going to work nobody gets promoted for, that is not a morale issue. That is a capacity you're already paying for and not receiving. The fix is not a program, it's a design. Make invisible work visible, distribute it deliberately, and build redundancy where one person going down doesn't stop a function. That is the difference between naming burnout and designing against it. Next month, I'm writing about building personal redundancy backup, making sure that if you go down, things keep running. And you might be sitting there thinking, you just spent 20 minutes telling me not to stockpile, and now you want me to build reserves? Which is it, Lisa? Here's the difference, and it matters because stockpiling is you gathering more. Redundancy means the load is shared, not stored in one place. Redundancy does not mean you personally carry a bigger reserve. It means the system holds without you. Those are opposite moves. One adds to your plate and the other takes your plate out of a critical path. Does that make sense? So every hour you spend overgathering is an hour you're not spending building the thing that would let you step away. So this is not a detour from redundancy. It's a prerequisite. In the article last month, I asked you to name what your depletion was costing you. This month is one question, and you're going to ask it about one thing. What does today actually require? Not what would be impressive, not what would be airtight, not what would leave nothing for anyone to criticize. What does it require? Pick one thing this week where you know the honest answer is less than what you're planning to do, and do the less. Not for your whole life, then pay attention to what happens, because I'm willing to bet that what happens is nothing, and nothing is data. A couple of things to expect so they don't throw you. The first is that it'll feel like sloppiness. It'll feel like you're getting away with something. That feeling is not a warning signal. It's a withdrawal system, and it fades faster than you think. The second is that some of you will discover the extra was actually holding something up, that you're in a room where the surplus is the price of being taken seriously, and reducing it costs you something real. I'm not going to pretend that room does not exist. It does, and I worked in it. But you need to see it clearly. It's not a personal capacity problem. It's information about the environment, and it belongs in a bigger decision about whether you stay. Either way, you learned something you didn't know this morning. Now, before I go, I've run strategy sessions built on exactly this. Capacity is one piece of it. Leadership is a piece. Resilience is the whole point. I'm starting with one-on-one strategy sessions, 90 minutes, just you and me focused on what is actually in your way. I'm starting there because the fastest way through this is not a room full of other people's situation. It's a direct conversation about yours. Now, group sessions are coming later this year, but the one-on-one sessions are available now. So, if you're sitting there thinking, my problem is not that I need rest, even though you probably do. My problem is that my whole configuration is wrong. That is the conversation. The booking link is on the Leadership Story Substack. And while you're there, you'll also find the Strategy Unscripted article this episode is based on called You Can't Scale Yourself on Empty. Now, you can reach me at LinkedIn too, but Substack is where everything lives. And if this landed, send this to a woman that needs it now. That is how this show grows, and I don't take it for granted. I'm Lisa Jones, helping you discover the leadership story you were meant to tell.